We just logging on. So YouTube page. So give me a second, family. Let me go wash my hands and wash my face real fast. Peace, peace, peace. I hope everybody on the YouTube page. YouTube page, Noble. YouTube page. I'm directing everybody to the YouTube page. Go to the YouTube page. Islam. YouTube page. We got 3 more minutes. With 2 more minutes, I'm letting everybody get the pencils and their papers. Go to my YouTube page. Kari Ibn Hakeem Goodman Bey. We about to get started. Get your pencils and your papers. Islam. Get your pencils and your papers. Oh, let me see, did I bring my... I didn't even bring my bag with my extra stuff. Oh, yes, I did. Okay, now, I got some gifts in, too. I got some extra literature. And I said, remember I told y'all this was out of print? I sent it to a lot of my members PDF. But if you want the hard copy, I got them. Hard copy. They're $40 donation. It comes with a tax-exempt receipt so you can claim it on your taxes at the end of the year. That's why I charge a little extra for my books, because it's a donation. And you're not just giving money away. You contributing to a real organization that has tax-exempt status. So everything is a donation with us, and you get a tax-exempt receipt. I also got a bonus book out, and it's to discover the key to the Moorish questionnaires. I got this available too for Moors. For the same, for 40 donation. Comes with a tax-exempt receipt. You see? So I never hide literature from my brothers. The Unto Thee I Grant is part of what our Moorish Quran is constructed of. How I teach, and I tell everybody, I showed y'all that our prophet didn't plagiarize nothing. Unto Thee I Grant, Aquarian Gospels, Eliseus Levi told you that came from the Akashic records. Right? So we got 1 more minute, man. It's warm in here. I hope you got your pencils. Everybody got their pencils and their papers? Because we about to be in school today, man. Whew. If more is like the message that we give in the history lecture, man, give a donation. Cash App $ KG Bay, man. We don't ask for much. Give a simple donation, man, if you like what we talking about. If you was here in the temple, you would give a donation, I'm sure. So, let's get this started. Let's get this started. I told Moors what time I was coming, but you know how a lot of Moors, they be on that, I don't know what time they be on, but oh well. It is what it is. So, I told you I feature a couple books, right? And I always tell Moors, go on, a lot of times when I talk about a lot of books that I have and the historical aspect that I come from, thanks for the donation, Noble. And you will see, thanks for the donation. Thanks for the donation, Noble. But you will see how a lot of things, when I talk about history, when I talk about pseudo-academia, how the Western education thought process, they try to, how can I say it, bury things and put them in the libraries and the museums and charge an arm and a leg for the literature and the science. Well, I'm a scientist, so that's what I spend my funds on things that I need. Thanks for the donation. Let me turn this music down. And so the first history, thanks for the donation, more. Cash App, $ KG Bay. But the first piece of history I'm going to talk about is the Forgotten Cause of the Civil War by Lawrence Tenzer, right? And I told Moors I'm going to always highlight books and things to let you know and to show you how a lot of times we don't know. A lot of times we deal with brothers and sisters that call themselves scholars. And when you test their scholarship, especially coming from an educational standpoint, there's no scholarship, right, Moors? And it's no disrespect to anyone. It's just history has no sides. And I'm an educator, man, and I don't get caught up in people's dogmatic, connotated, subjective, arbitrary explanation of things. I deal with history, and truth has no sides. I tell Moors, nothing is hidden. It's just they charge a lot for it. And that's why I tell all Europeans, no disrespect, even lower level Masons, they know the science because the stuff is in books. And I have all the books. I have all the literature, like The Forgotten Cause of the Civil War by Lawrence Tenzer. And when you go on Amazon, you see how much the book costs, or the Wisdom. This is how much it costs on Amazon. Here you go right here. I have them all from my contacts. I have elders at Cambridge and Oxford. Here go to the front of the book. Let me show you how much the science costs. And this is used for $1,785. Used. You see that? For $1,785. You see what I'm saying, Moors? And so I have those. And that's what I'll be saying. When Moors just be talking, I'll be like, yeah, he ain't talking about nothing because all his finances is wrapped up in clothes. And then I'm gonna show you the other book that I'm gonna highlight today. So I show y'all that I don't have time to play with people, man, and make things up. I'm an educator, and truth has no size, and the law and history is tied all in together. Your Moorish history is tied all together. Now, the 103 amazing facts about the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere. You see this book? Y'all see this book? I'm gonna show you how much it costs on Amazon. Watch this. Watch this. I'm about to show you. Let me see. Where's the book price? Hold on, Morris. Thanks for calling this Miss Ray speaking. How may I help you? Hello? Now, watch this. Let me show you how much this costs. Let me see. Let me show you how much this book costs. 250 grand. 250 grand. You see that? 250 grand. You see what I'm saying, Morris? And you try to tell me that our science and its history ain't valuable. and being a student and paying your one-time $250 fee to get all your books and literature and your fares, and then a 100-time monthly fee to help me build this temple out here in Arizona to get literature tax exempt so I can build. 103 amazing facts about the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere unveils the true identity of the said African American, Latino, and Hispanic. It not only exposes the pseudo title placed upon indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, but acts as an antidote that breaks the spell of amnesia, an unprecedented work of art. The book is written in a style that deprograms the mind while reprogramming the mind simultaneously. The author takes you into and reveals the psychological details and layers of programming. When I talk about the Tavistock Institute of Human Engineering, I got that big book too. Go on Amazon and see how much it costs. I got it all. That's why I said it's nothing new under the sun. The only person that's caught up in spookism is we call an uninitiate. We don't get caught up in that. But the author takes you into and reveals the psychological details and layers of programming that has transformed the true indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere into a newly made and manufactured entity on a mental and spiritual and physical level. The book exposes and takes you right to the yoke of the matter in layman terms. Only 13 leather-bound copies will be sold exclusively with the author's signature. I don't give a damn about the author's signature because I know who getting the book and trying to charge an arm and a leg for him. We ain't got time for that. We don't play those games. We get the literature and then we move on. We got the science. So I got the whole book outlined. And I'll show you all that, but we're going to talk about that. And also the American and the forgotten cause of the Civil War. Americans are still asking about the reason the Civil War was fought. Neglected evidence shows that a forgotten cause existed for the greater conflict, a causing having to do with race and slavery. And although the first slaves in America were black, beginning in colonial period and continuing up until the Civil War, there were many slaves who looked as white as their masters. Sexual relations between white and blacks produced a class of white slaves because of the law throughout the South. And every child of a slave mother was a slave from the moment of birth, even after the endless number of generations went by. And all discernible Negroid traits were long gone. That's why we talk about the blood. The blood, you can't tell what nobody nationality is by looking at them. Stop playing with me. The existence of white slaves posed a threat to free whites living in the North. And this science addresses this racial aspect of pre-Civil War politics with the in-depth analysis it rightly deserves. If causes can be defined as a political or social dynamic, Moors, which exacerbated the tensions between the North and the South, then the white slavery certainly qualifies for that. And I want to jump all into it because we're going to talk about it in a second. And if I got time, I'm gonna detail some of this, where everybody be acting like they don't know the history, and those Nation of Islam Muslims acting like they don't know the truth, because they got caught up in that religious stuff. The real Indian is the Negro, aka the Blackamoor, and I'm gonna break that science down. So let's just jump. I'm gonna give you a little summary of the forgotten cause of the Civil War. And when they talk about the definition of white slavery in the antebellum South, the enslavement of people who were physically white, they call them so-called white slaves, were presumed to be descendants from a black female slave according to the material descent rule of inherited slave status. We call that the maternal descent rule, Moors, of inherited slave status. There was no way to really determine who was descended from a female African slave and who was pure white. Well, to tell you, all the foremothers, all your so-called presidents and all of them had that black blood. When I show you the 5 Negro and the 6 Negro presidents, I show you. I mean, it's just what it is. And if the slave descent was broken by manumissions, white slaves could often become legally white. And Northerners, who were told by Southern slaveholders elite that slavery was justified by the inferiority of the black race, were horrified to discover that people as whites, as themselves, were being held as slaves. You see, Southern political power and the federal fugitive slave law allow slave catchers to seize alleged fugitives from bondage with no due process. Here we go, due process. When I say proclaim, declare, and have due process, where only people with nationality have due process. I'll keep telling y'all, white slavery meant that one's physical appearance was no protection for illegal kidnapping and the political ramifications of this fact. unknowledgeable by most American historians. When I told you they ain't gonna teach you this in school. That's why when I go places and teach at different colleges and in different places where it be all different nationalities, my lectures be packed. And the only one that don't know the true history is a Negro and a Moor that think he knows something. They don't know any history. But by most American historians, are the anti-slavery politics increasingly emphasized that threat of slavery to northern whites, and the fear and hatred of slavery was usually not, as commonly believed, an altruistic response to the suffering of blacks by liberal whites. Racial intermixture and mixed race whites were thereof or therefore important factors in increasing the tension that ultimately led to the American Civil War, and not just marginal characters in bad melodramas Moors, right? Right? Right, Moors? This science answer a couple questions that American historians are always asking, but don't really want to answer. Why was slavery the great moral and political issue of the antebellum period if it affected only blacks? See, you never asked that question. A people who were deemed an inferior race, right? And if slavery was a threat to whites in general, and white slaves were recognized as fellow whites by Northerners, and historians must admit that there was no clear dividing line between the races. That was made up by Bloomback. I'm telling you, white and black ain't nothing but what? Status. And they must acknowledge that Southern slaves were a threat to American in general. Neither liberal nor conservative historians want to admit that stuff. Right? Right? But also in this research, when we talk about antebellum Republican political literature, to show that the threat of white slavery was used by Abraham Lincoln's party to galvanize voters and the Republican Party activists, and Lincoln included. He knew that the Northerners had good reason to fear the South and its unstable need for more and more slaves. Southern pro-slavery apologists constantly stated that their slaves were better off than free white laborers in the North. And more than that, Moors, the pro-slavery intellectuals defended slavery as a good in and of itself, regardless of race or color. And while the current fashion is to argue that Southern states were merely resisting the tyranny of a federal government, you also forget that the South effectively controlled Congress and the presidency for most of the antebellum period. And Northern whites had seen the Fugitive Slave Act shoved down their throats, and the males censored, and the expansion of slavery into the new territories. Also, Abraham Lincoln wasn't the only one who knew that the nation couldn't exist half slave and half free, and it would become all slave or free slave. And if slaves, a society had triumphed over free society, who is native enough to think that greedy slave owners wouldn't have used their power to add many poor whites and Indians, so-called, to their property? And I can go on and on with that, right? But I just wanted to give you all a backdrop on that, right? I wanted to give you a backdrop on that history. All right, let's see what I'm gonna give y'all real fast, because the other part is gonna be good. And if Moors want this, I told y'all, this right here, I have to make these because I don't have them PDF. I might have to check PDF, but I'll print these for you, ship them off to you for $55. Also, the 103 question of the American Indian. 103 facts about the Indian. I'll PDF you that. I'll copy it and PDF it. But if you want to yourself, I'll send a PDF to you, man. It's no biggie to me. You saw it was 250 grand. All we doing is asking for donations. You get a tax exempt receipt, man. You send a $40 donation, I'll send you this, man. It's nothing. But we trying to do something. We trying to build our temple. So I'm gonna give a little bit of this, right? But at times, I'm gonna give a little bit of this. But at times, statements or phrases can be, this is what I'm finna give y'all right now is 103 amazing facts about the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere. And it's by Kenyon, a non-reservationist. And at the time, statements or phrases can be caused that human mind to tap into the worlds or realities where a bigger picture or image of that time zone or reality is given, and revealing more information about that reality. Someone else has been responsible for recording the history of our people for the past 500 years. Other than who? Us. And that's why I'm gonna write our story. I'm gonna rewrite our story. I'm gonna give credit to the authors, but I'm gonna make sure all our people have it. Just like when you're doing a research paper in college and you do a dissertation and it's coming from peer reviewed scholarly research, and I tell more that you got to credit the author where the original idea came from. That's all we're gonna do. Just like our prophet did, divinely gathered and prepared for our people. You know? And other than that, our people and the perception of our past is very limited. Our past and how we perceive our past has been shown to us by a people who have so far not recorded our history correctly for the past 500 years. That's why they wanted to control the pen, to change the narrative, and whitewash everything out of the history books. And made these facts penetrate the psyche of many people and cause a mental stimulus that ignites the spirit and breaks the spell of amnesia that currently plagues most of the Negro, blacks, and colored, and misnomered Latino and Mexicans. We are in desperate need of a total memory recall, Moors. Right? That's why a lot of Europeans want to diss the work, you know, because they tried to bury it in a shallow grave for a long time. You see what I'm saying? And a lot of our history was buried in a shallow grave, per se. But I just want to give y'all a couple facts, then we're going to jump into other science. But the first one is Black Indians have lived in the Western Hemisphere since the beginning of time, when you research the doctrine of discovery, when a European so-called discovered and the indigenous people was already here. I'm telling you, research that science. The so-called Black Indians were not spawned or created as a result of Africans coming to the Western Hemisphere during the transatlantic slave trade, mixing in with native people of the Western Hemisphere region, also known as so-called Native American Indians. But native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, I said the Western Hemisphere, also known as Indians, did not refer to themselves or their ancestors as Indians, Moors. We use the word Indian since most people are accustomed to this title. The word Indian, red man, and Native American are European colonized terms, and native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere refer to themselves by ways of tones when I talk about vibrations or expressions. And your spirit said who you were. And the name given to you was based upon what type of spirit that you possess, Moors. And all natives or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, misnomered as Indians, possess different psychological features. As far as the hair, the texture, bone structure, skin tone, vary, all that stuff. All native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere did not and do not have high cheekbones, slanted eyes, reddish copper skin, or straight black hair. All native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere did not live in teepees or pueblos, Moors. It's difficult for society to accept the Black Indian as being native, as being native to this land, right? Right? Because society has been brainwashed with fabricated, fake images of indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere. Right, Moors? Right? Come on, y'all, talk to me. Talk to me. I mean, I ain't talking to myself. Right, Moors? That's why Hosea 4:6 says, my people are lost due to a lack of knowledge. Why? Because we refuse to learn. We refuse to learn. And it's 103 facts, but I don't want to break down all 103 facts. I'll read a couple more. Let me see. The U.S. government selected a certain psychological type of native Indian to promote the world as its real Indian, as well as this is how a real Indian looks. And the dark-skinned native indigenous to the Western Hemisphere were reclassified during the 17 and 1800s as Negroes and colored. And certain dark-skinned natives were allowed to settle on reservations with pale-skinned natives, and most were not. Also, pale-skinned natives came about as a result of original dark-skinned native breeding with pale-skinned Europeans, and a light-skinned native born from the union would again breed with a pale European. Thus, the progeny of this union would become more of a pale genetic recessive, Islam. And after centuries of this breeding process, eventually produced the pale-skinned native of the Western Hemisphere. It's just facts. And the dark-skinned native who did not mix their seed still endured. And the U.S. government had reclassified most as black Americans or African Americans. And certain dark-skinned natives indigenous to the Western Hemisphere were given ultimatums. Go to Oklahoma and be an Indian on the reservation, or stay where you are and stay where you're at and be reclassified as a Negro or colored. And most dark-skinned native indigenous to the Western Hemisphere who were reclassified as Negro or colored during the 17 and 1800s have found themselves in the 20th and 21st century again, reclassified as Black Americans and African Americans. And dark-skinned native indigenous to the Western Hemisphere who embraced the Spanish culture during the colonial era, either by choice or force, have found themselves engulfed or assimilated into the Spanish culture and the Spanish language. And now most of them have lost their knowledge of themselves and their true identity. They too have been reclassified as Latino or Hispanic, all misnomers. All native people or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, spoke different dialects of a language synonymous to the Hebrew language. When I talk about Bantu, when I talk about Yoruba, when I talk about Yamani, when I talk about all those dialects, when I talk about my Zulu dialect, all of it. When I talk about Moorish Latin. But most early European writers during the 1400s, throughout the 1800s Moors, including pale-skinned Jews, all agreed that the heathen savage of the Western Hemisphere, aka the Indians, throughout the Americas were without a doubt descendants of the lost tribe of Israel. A pale-skinned European by the name of James Adair. Remember I was telling you the book I got? An English writer and trader during the 18th century. He lived amongst the Black Indians in the Southeast. And James Adair, he wrote the book entitled The History of the American Indian. And in that science, he claimed that the Indian of the Western Hemisphere were descendants of the lost tribe of Israel. Just like when I talk about the book Bertrand Thomas, the Arab, how the European stayed with the damn so-called Arab forever. He stayed with him for 14 years. Ain't no such thing as no Arab. We are the Arabs. I'm telling you, it's just what it is. Don't get mad at me. I'm giving you scholarship. Nat Turner, Paul Cuffey, Crispus Attucks, Dr. Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Denmark Vesey, Elijah Poole Abbey, aka Honorable Elijah Muhammad, amongst millions of others, were indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians. The titles Black, American, and African American are fake, inappropriate European colonized titles to keep indigenous people off the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, under a spell of ignorance. You out of here?
Yep.
Okay.
What are these? Just stuff waiting.
Oh, that's mine.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, have a good one. Oh, I said have a good one. But the titles Black American and African American were purposely created to psychologically and spiritually disconnect indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, from their true motherland, which is right up under their feet. That's right. Even when I do science, I don't agree with a lot of people, but Jesse Jackson is a South Carolina Cherokee. I mean, he knew about his Moorish legacy, but them Negroes got the check just like they did back with the Big Six. They started and promoted this fake title of African American that has been imposed upon Black Indians, indigenous to the Western Hemisphere region, and it became quite profitable to brainwash the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka the Indians, into thinking that Africa is their native land. Africa per se, but that's another teaching. There is a campaign currently underway by the U.S. government and the U.S. government sponsored natives that preaches a doctrine that says that the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere is a result of African mixture and has not always dwelled in the Western Hemisphere. But that's garbage. Most so-called Black Americans or so-called African Americans, when asked if any Native Americans are in their family, and at least 95% with the answer yes. But then in addition to this, most so-called Black Americans or so-called African Americans are also to give you the name of the tribe that their relatives come from. And thus the so-called Black American or African American oddly insist upon calling themselves Black American or African American instead of referring to themselves by way of ancestral tribal name, which will bear your L, that has survived in the family, which in essence is our true nationality. Most so-called Black Americans or so-called African Americans find it difficult to accept themselves as being native or indigenous to the Western Hemisphere because of programmed, fabricated images of the so-called Indians or the so-called native people in the Western Hemisphere. Those are fake images, right? The Black Indian image does not register within the psyche because of the fake imagery programming that the U.S. government has instilled in our minds of how native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere look. I told y'all, research the doctrine of discovery. The spirit of the so-called Black American or the so-called African American tells them one thing, while the programmed fake image of their own ancestors say another. Didn't they pass a law that the so-called Indians and Blacks couldn't be around each other? Yes, that was a law. It was like the, one of it was like the Black Christian laws, the Black Christian codes. But we did end up going around each other when we disappeared, and we went to a lot of the native tribes and we blended in with them. We looked just like them. But that's a whole nother teaching. But absolutely. Don't y'all know native or indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka the Indians, built pyramids and pyramid mounds just like the ancient Egyptians? When I showed y'all right here in the Grand Canyons, they've been had all these mounds and pyramids in the Grand Canyons out here in Arizona. I'm a scholar. All of us went. Everybody that graduated with their advanced degree with honors, we all went. It was 23 students. I got pictures, everything, man. So I don't get it with no folktale, with nobody just lying. But this synonymous comparison of both culture from opposite sides of the world is because they both were genetically linked. They both are the same people. Both are the same people. That's how you see a lot of the mounds and everything in certain areas across the board. And during the time of Pangea, a Greek word that means all one. Pangea means all one. And all of the continents on the earth were one mass of land, and people lived and thrived during the time of Pangea. That's how we got to and fro. They called us pirates. That's why certain animals that weren't indigenous to the land got certain places. That's why you saw certain drugs and things like cocaine and marijuana that didn't grow in certain areas. We took them and we barred it, and you see them in people's coffins and in their DNA. But Pangea, people lived and thrived during the time of Pangea. And this is a large explanation as to why the pyramid builders in the Eastern Hemisphere and the pyramid builders in the Western Hemisphere have cultures that are incredibly synonymous. And the continents continue to move. Some move 4 inches a year more, and the continents will one day become one mass of land again. That's why a lot of people getting afraid, because you ain't gonna be able to live forever. And the continent are currently separate at this time. However, the genetic links of being from Pangea never parted. Also, the term Moor was applied to dark-skinned, brown-skinned, reddish, brown-skinned people who were not only indigenous to Europe, but to the West and North Africas. Even Black Indians of the Western Hemisphere were also dubbed with this title. Indigenous Black Celts, Indigenous Black Britons, Indigenous Black Portuguese, Indigenous Black Spaniards, also known as Moors, had a long time of knowledge of this indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Hold on, y'all. Thank you for calling this men's work. Kareem speaking. I'm sorry? Do they have the ticket? If they have the ticket, they can pick it up. We just don't like giving people stuff in the way we used to do that, and then things happen. So if they got the ticket or they come in with your name and your name and everything, we give it to them. Yeah. All right. You see what I'm saying, Moors? Right? Right? Were drugs found and committed in coffins? A lot of stuff come from us, man. A lot of people called them drugs, but they wasn't drugs per se. With like marijuana and things and certain animals that's not indigenous to certain areas. Yeah. Let me see where I'll stop that. All right, let me get back to my other part. But don't you know the U.S. school system and the media have been the two biggest giants behind programming into the masses, the fabrication of the Indian, you know? Okay, I gave you the Pangea part. I gave you the Moor. I told you about all the Celts and all that. But certain black indigenous Europeans, aka Moors, that went under such titles as clergyman and European nobility shared a common consciousness with pale-skinned Europeans. And that consciousness being that the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, aka Indians, were untamed heathen savages. That's why they call them heathens in the doctrine of discovery. The same thing when a lot of Negro, black, and color be thinking Islam is some black man religion. And I say, you ain't read the Bukhari Hadith, because in the Bukhari Hadith, it names so-called all Muhammad slaves. And it calls you a raisin head. And if you believe, and if you dream of an Asiatic woman, it's an evil omen. But we're going to fall for that garbage, for that religious garbage. Both dark-skinned and pale-skinned Europeans who were Celtics, Britain, Gaelic, or what have you, who were fleeing religious persecution in Europe and were struggling to preserve their tradition and customs, dubbed pagan ways. All this, they ran to the bosom of the black Indian nations indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. Y'all got to know this. And black Indian nations, different clans native to Europe, both shared a common spirituality that centered around certain forces, Moors, and certain facts. Y'all got to know this. Remove the veil of religious dogma. Remove the veil, and let's deal with science and history. Right? Right? Right, Moors? Don't y'all know certain Moors helped to navigate Christopher Columbus' voyage to the New World? He wasn't lost. He knew where he was coming because Moors was on there, and Jesuits was on there. He knew where he was going. Certain Moors helped Christopher Columbus navigate the voyage to the New World. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly where he was going, simply because of who was on the boat with him. And the U.S. constitutional government is a plagiarized copy of a black Indian governmental system, the Iroquois Nation. I'll show y'all that later. That's right. The founding fathers did not find anything. They went to black Indians. They went to the Iroquois Nation, seeking assistance to break away from their chief back in England, King George III. And the Iroquois Nation taught them their system of government. And the only part that the so-called founding fathers left out was the matriarch. The black Indian woman ruled the Iroquois Nation. And most black Indians of the Western Hemisphere found themselves succeeded by European lifestyles, custom and traditions. When we give up our custom and traditions, assimilate. When the American Revolution war broke out, black Indians found themselves fighting against their own kinsmen. Some black Indian nations sided with British, while other black Indian nations sided with the colonial rebels, aka the so-called Americans. And after black Indian nations helped to set up the colonial government, which is America, and in addition to help to sponsor military support for the new colonial government, the so-called black Indian nations continued to fight and war amongst themselves, as they did before and after Europeans set foot upon the Western Hemisphere shores. That's right. Black Indians were not conquered by Europeans or the so-called white man. Black Indians had a rich history of intertribal warfare amongst each other that continued. When I showed y'all my letter, one of the books by Sheikh Anta Diop, when I told you about how African Islam wasn't destroyed by the Europeans first. Yes, you had the Arab slave trade, but that was later in history. So we can't confuse the two parts of history. And I'll lecture on that later. But Western Hemisphere was so great that it left them in a state of impotency, with impotency setting in after years and years of warfare. After the colonial government was established, which is America, black Indian nations continued to aid the new colonial government. General Mad Anthony Wayne, aka the Black Snake, was a black Indian who served under the George Washington administration, and the army of General Anthony Wayne consisted of mostly black Indians in the ranks and did the entire colonial governmental army. Beside black Indians making up the bulk of the colonial government army, which is America, Moors also filled up the ranks. Just like I'm gonna show y'all in Hitler's army. Hitler had a lot of Negro, blacks, and color, and a lot of Chinese or different nationalities in his army. It's just what it is, and I'll tell y'all what it's all about. A lot of stuff was in German, and a lot of Moors don't read German. Well, I got all the books. I'm gonna show you what Hitler was saying about who was the bastard. He wasn't talking about you and me. But George Washington established treaties or contracts with various black Indian nations, as well as with the Moors, for military support against other black Indian nations who did not support the occupancy of the new colonial government, which is America. And after the colonial government confiscated most black Indian lands, That's called the doctrine of discovery. How you gonna discover something that's already occupied? They, the colonial government, refused to pay black Indian warriors pensions for their military support. And during the American Civil War, black Indians joined the Confederate Army in hopes of winning to secure the little ancestral lands they had left. Other blacks joined, just like when we talk about we are the chosen ones. When I told you about our empress, Tunic, Turner Bay, and how in the early 90s, when we talk about the Louisiana Purchase, I show you what no Louisiana Purchase, it was stolen land. How in the 90s they tried to give about like 90 acres back, but that was just a tittle of what was stolen. And this is all can be found in the Library of Congress. It's just what it is. It's just what it is. Nick Jack, also known as Nigger Jack, was a black Chickamauga, a black Indian, the ancestor-led raids against the colonial rebel army in the Americas. During the colonial rebel uprising, American Revolutionary War, he fought alongside of the British Tories. His hideout was a cave in the vicinity of what is now known as Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in the state of Georgia, in the region known as Cobb County. It's a park and a road and a creek named after this great warrior. There were thousands upon thousands of black Indians who fought in the American Civil War. Don't y'all know when y'all go to Jamestown, it's the whole road to Jamestown. When they talk about when the first so-called slaves came here in 1916 for food stuff, I'll break you down. And the free blacks or of Israel Hill. I mean, this stuff is in the history books, but you letting somebody tell you that you're a slave. But they only thought themselves to be Negroes, right? Why would we do that? Why would we do that, right? Right, Moors? Somebody talk to me. Talk to me, Moors. Somebody talk to me. Most Buffalo soldiers were black Indians dispatched by the U.S. Army to assist in colonizing and confiscating of other black Indians' lands west of the Mississippi River. Reservations, natives, which don't know the true history and who are also brainwashed by images, feel that the Buffalo soldiers, who are ill mistaken and ill classified as African Americans, helped the pale face drive them off the lands and onto reservations. There is a lake, and yeah, I keep telling people that. Yes, it is. The last aspect of this thing is, however, true. Hold on, y'all. How you doing? Good. How can I help you?
I got a suit a couple days ago. I was just trying to pick it
You
up.
got it altered?
Yes.
What's your first and last name?
Daniel Gonzalez.
Give me 1 second, Mr. Gonzalez. How you doing today?
Good.
All right, Mr. Gonzalez, just got a hemp done.
Awesome.
All set for you, my friend. Yes, sir. Have a great day. Right. You see that, Morris? And we still in part one. We ain't even got to the second part yet. You see what I'm saying? Islam, talk to me. Islam, I ain't talking to myself, Emma. Y'all all right? I'm trying to give a temperature check. Islam, talk to me. Shalom Alakim, Aya Asha Aya, peace be with you. Hotep, say something. Cash App, $ KGB, Morris. Come on, man. I'm giving y'all science. Yep, it's a lot in it. That's why I tell Morris, I know when Morris study. I know when Morris just print stuff just to say they have it. You ain't studying the science, right? Most of Navajo code talkers who were used to assist in the U.S. government in World War II were blue black Indians, and the photo and film footage of black Navajo who participated in the war, they were carved out of history. Just like I showed you how Prince Whipple and Oliver Cromwell was whitewashed out the Battle of Bunker Hill. Didn't I show y'all that about America and history in black and white? Didn't I show y'all that already? Didn't I show y'all that? I showed y'all that. The term Negro and colored was not only applied to black Indians to psychologically and spiritually remove us from our lands, these colonized titles were also applied to black Indians who were incorporated into the slave market. Black Indians did not raid each other. I'm telling y'all, man. Most cities and towns today in what is known as the United States of America sit on top of ancient black Indian cities and towns that were first there. I promise you. Most black Indians of the Western Hemisphere who are falsely labeled as African Americans and blacks fought for their civil rights during the 1940s and 60s. They were not known as black Indians or being indigenous. Some knew. Some knew about their heritage, man. But then you got others that take the check. They lie to you, you know? I promise you this. I promise you this, Moors. Right? I promise you. Black Indians revealed. They navigated underground. That's right. It all synchronizes. That's what I be telling Moors. That's what I be trying to tell Moors. We're historians, man. This is history. This ain't his story. This our story. Black Indians did slave raise on each other before and after European arrival. And black Indians owned other black Indians as slaves. These slaves were also classified as Negroes. European writers took advantage of that fact that I just told y'all, how black Indians slaved each other. To say that Indian owned slaves, that's why fake European images of so-called Indians were promoted, showing so-called Indians owning slaves, and art paintings were displayed, showing distorted images of natives in the Western Hemisphere owning dark-skinned people as slaves, who in most cases were also native, and the fake image of the indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere, which usually displayed them as having pale skin, shows them owning slaves whose skin is always depicted as dark. And pale-skinned Europeans helped to create a consciousness which subliminally says that slaves and Negroes are synonymous. And when most people hear or read about a slave, simultaneously, the image of a dark-skinned person appears in their mind. Yeah, it's Mounds. How's it going, man? How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. How can we help you guys?
My son was supposed to come in here.
Nope. Okay.
He's looking for a suit for prom.
You want to get something today?
If you can, yeah.
Well, what color are you looking for?
And we want to get one of those. I want to get one of those.
Ty Barnes, what color?
Black with a red shirt.
Let me show you the smallest I have, because my smallest. Let's put this jacket on. Now my red shirt, I'm not gonna have a red shirt. It's gonna fit him. My red shirts are gonna be big and baggy.
Man size.
Yes. A shirt for his size, you're gonna probably have to get it from like Express, where they sell slim fit. It's just my slim fits would be.
Because he got his suit here last year.
Yeah.
He actually got that one.
Yeah. See, this is what size did he get last year? This is a 34. This is the smallest I have.
They're 34, 36.
34. I have to switch the pants. See how all that room he has? So I would do 34 jacket. He just have to try everything on. But I definitely wouldn't do the shirt because the shirt too big here. I would do the tie, but you know the shirt is just it's gonna be big and baggy. And I can show you how 14 and a half fit if you want to see it. The smallest I have. But it's not. I don't have a try on red. It's gonna be white to try on. Is that okay?
Oh.
What if you do that suit?
So let's get you in the feeding room. Excuse me, sir and ma'am.
Oh, look, why'd you do that?
You don't just do that.
Can I please may have some?
Red and red.
That's not messing back here.
To make sure everything fits. And I'll show you what else we need done. If you need, because all pants are going to need him. You know that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
He wants like the skinny pants.
I got you. That means, but what that is, you have to get them tailored. To get them tailored out, she charged $18 to slim them out, and then $12 for the hem.
Yeah.
Okay. Did y'all get that? Yep. Somebody that'll take the check. So what we getting ready to do, Morris? I'm getting ready to help. My client just came in, so I got to help my client real fast. So what time is it? 6, 7? Let me see what time it is. Let me get exactly time so I can tell you what time we're going to log back on. We're going to finish out. We're going to ride it all the way out.
No, did you do it?
Excuse me. Excuse me. All right, so it's 6:32. So at 6:50, we're gonna log back on and we'll finish out. Actually, at 6:50, log back on, and when you see me back on, log back on and we'll finish out. So get you a drink of water, relax, go to the restroom, log back on. Islam for part 2. Peace.